So I've been looking into sensory processing disorder or, yeah, sensory processing disorder in adults. And they talk a lot about how, the basic gist is there's 5-ish senses, not counting, actually proprioception and vestibular, big time senses as well. There are 7 senses that each person experiences all the time, and when it comes to someone who has sensory processing disorder, which are a lot of neurodivergent people and a lot of people on the spectrum, and a lot of people who experience learning disabilities, each sense has a spectrum. And for a lot of neurotypical people, there's like a window that they can sense the world. And for a lot of sensory divergent people, either they get overloaded with this sensation or they get underloaded for this sensation, in which their behavior is like a sensory seeking. For example, someone who might be like auditory seeking, they'll go and listen to like a really loud something or another. They'll put earphones on with really loud music in order to feel normal. A lot of my experience is avoidant, I believe. And this may sound straightforward, right? Where it's like, oh, well, Victoria doesn't like spinning things. I get extremely vestibularly overloaded. That I know. It's completely predictable. Like if I watch my kids spinning on, I watched them do musical chairs the other day, and I lasted about 10 seconds because it was too much nystagmus, which is when your eye goes like that. So I start to get really nauseous and overwhelmed from that. I am very olfactorily overloaded. I can't handle any sort of synthetic scent. I start to get nauseous and actually emotionally overwhelmed. So I have to kind of and it's just so funny because it's a sensory experience that creates an emotional experience. And then suddenly you have an emotional experience within a social experience, and you have to stay attuned to what the other person is experiencing. And oftentimes for me, I become hyper attuned and hyper vigilant to the fact that my experience is so out of the realm of the normal experience that I begin to become hyper vigilant to basically what the other person is experiencing from me. For example, if someone shows up in perfume, the process is, oh my God, this is like the worst. I'm miserable right now. I'm not miserable from this person. This person is not a miserable person, but I am miserable in the presence of their scent. Have you ever tried telling someone that their perfume sucks in a polite way? It does not go well. It never goes well. In fact, it gets as far as like, I'm sorry, your perfume is kind of overwhelming for me. And then they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And then you have to be like, I'm sorry, can you go to the bathroom and actually wash it off your body? And then that may or may not be done correctly. So it's this really interesting sensory experience turned into emotional experience, turned into either you have to separate yourself from this very normal social experience, or you have to recruit the other person to support you who may or may not understand the sensory experience. So for the things that are predictable, you might get a system down, to be like, oh, well, you could be like, oh, I'm sorry, I always have this like thing. Sorry, it's a thing. Can you just work with me here? Like sometimes you get that down. There's always like a little bit of like, similar to being any other marginalized person, there's just that little weight that gets put on you every single time. Like a little, not like a microaggression, but like just a really weird micro interaction that you have to handle. And it depends on how you are with sensing the... I'm back. And I changed because I have to get ready for something. Anyway, it depends on how you sense other people in this interaction. So a lot of sensory divergent people are impeccable at picking up nonverbal cues. I want to go so far as to even saying there's like an extra sensory experience of what that person is feeling and sensing that they may not even be totally aware of. Again, I'll mention like marginalized people, when they go throughout the world, they just kind of know that look of like, oh, there I am, like making someone just a little bit uncomfortable. And, it can't be proven because we don't have the apparatus to measure things. There's tons of research to show like these little microaggressions that, that can be like measured in behavior outcomes. But people who are highly sensitive can hear words coming to them, but the energy that the person is giving off can be totally different. So anyway, that's a little tangent that someone who is sensory divergent might experience. They may experience the opposite, where they don't pick up on verbal cues and they're completely like oblivious to the fact that they might be exhibiting a behavior that is totally out of the norm and not expected for the experience. That is also a thing that can happen. So where am I going with this? So anyway, you have someone who has like a window of sensory tolerance, and it could either be overwhelming for them or they could be seeking. But here's the other kicker, and this is like I haven't read any literature on this. For me, like I know, no fragrances, no merry-go-rounds, no roller coasters, sure, no boats. My sensory experience in every moment is unpredictable. So, and this happens with my chronic pain too, and I would love to marry the two and figure out what the fuck is going on in my body, but that target that you have to hit for me, and I would, I'm very curious if this is other people who are sensory divergent, is moving. It's a moving target. So oftentimes, and the crux of my story is, if you're good friends or partnered with someone who is sensory divergent and you want them to be a nourished individual, you can't plan for what is going to feel good for this person. Like, because, and I think this has a lot to do with like ADHD people, like, which I was diagnosed with as well, because they didn't really know what neurodivergent learning disability, they checked a lot of things off the list, but we can't predict where our sensory experience is going to be that day. We can't pre-plan whether okay, I'm not saying we, I can't predict what is going to be nourishing for me that day. I can't predict whether going to a loud EDM rave is exactly what I need, and sometimes it is, or if the idea of like putting on glitter and a costume and going out just sounds redonkulous. I have to see where I am that very day, which makes pre-planning any sort of life experience that is nourishing for me almost completely impossible. There's nothing 100% hands down that is like, yes, I know that will feel good. Maybe a latte. Lattes, even at like 8 o'clock at night, I don't know, for some reason always feel good. Other than lattes, I really just like don't know what's going to be overwhelming for me and what's going to be pleasing for me. This includes food. This includes like energy levels. This includes like work, like how much do I want to intellectualize? How much do I want to feel? And it's all because there's this like constant balance of trying to regulate my sensory experience, because sometimes you could plan for this really like sensory low day, like I just want everything to be calm, to be quiet, and then you find you're going berserk because you're sensory underloaded. I mean, I'm sure like every human has this experience to a degree, but when it comes to living with someone with sensory divergence, it may become frustrating that you just want to help and you just want to do the right thing, and you so badly want this person to feel good, and you may try to plan something that feels good. And I'll even add in there like intimate experiences, like the unpredictability of like touch, like, and being physically close to someone, like also unpredictable and spontaneously emerging. So as a person who is like close to someone with sensory divergence, they are, a lot of sensory typical people have a fairly predictable outcome. They know what makes them feel good and what doesn't make them feel good. And they so desperately, they have their own needs. So they're trying to plan their life as to what feels good and what doesn't. And they have this person in their life who seems to be all over the place, and they're doing their best to control the situation, not only for the health and well-being of their person, but also the health and well-being of themselves. And anybody who has a sensory divergent kid can understand what this is like, like, let's plan to go to the zoo on Saturday. Oh, it turns out the zoo is an incredibly horrible idea, yet we invested in the BART tickets and we invested in blah, 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 blah. And it just turns out that it's just not going to work. Like there are significant planning things that you have to invest in that may not end up being, it may be unnourishing for that person. This is incredibly frustrating. And it's incredibly frustrating for the partner. And it's incredibly not only is it incredibly frustrating for the person with sensory divergence, it also, they have to balance seeing the frustration of the other person. So what can you do? I have no advice on how to pre-plan nourishing experiences for sensory divergent people, including myself. But there's a little moment where the person that's helping looks at the person with the sensory divergence. And just energetically, unconsciously, if you're feeling frustrated, which is a totally valid emotion to have, just imagine like channeling that frustration to, I don't know, like an object or a little star inside of that person, and not directing it towards the person, and not having the thought that, like, I did everything I can to control it. They're not doing their best to control it for themselves. Y'all are facing a common enemy. And I'll get to that later. Like, it's not the person. Try not to blame the person. And if the person is frustrated at you for planning the wrong thing, they're not frustrated at you. They're frustrated at this little gem inside of them that makes them extra super special. If you could get past that hump, you may find that sensory divergent people have an incredible gift at seeing the world in a different way. And they may even be able to pick up on things in their children or their kids or their clients and alchemize things that you didn't even know were there. And that can be fostered and become something beautiful, but it's not normal life. Like, it's not gonna be what you hope it to be, and it's not gonna be just like, this feels good, so let's go do it. And that is frustrating, and that is deserving of some grief, but it's not the person, you know, it's just something that they have. And if it turns into something that is more of a burden for you and you're unable to see, and the person with sensory divergence is struggling with this too. Like, every unique mind has an incredible gift to offer. You just have to find the right environment to foster it. And that may not happen because of a million different reasons. And that sucks. A lot of our children are growing up in an environment where they're unable to foster beautiful gifts that they have inside of them because of the world that they live in. It sucks, but it is. It just is. The first step we can do is to recognize our own feelings, recognize our own needs, know that they are valid and deserved, and that what might foster something for you might not foster something for the other person, and to know that there's something in between that can be looked at. But the second you start turning to the other person and blaming them and resenting them, including your children, that's when the opposite of healing happens. And I do think that there's a place for frustration. There's a place for anger. Like, you don't have to, like, what can be worse is you being like, oh, I'm going to be fine about this. And then you put in like extra patience, and then you burn out. I think a lot of parents with neurodivergent kids can understand this too. I'm going to do the right thing. And then they like kind of sacrifice a little bit of themselves in order to like try and foster this environment. It's hard. And then you might fail. And then you see this poor kid or person just feeling that frustration. And it's kind of like a dance where you both have to foster this understanding that it's not the person, it's just the little gem that they carry. And you may not realize what that little gem has to offer if you continue to just love, 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 love. What's the lesson, you know? I think that's all the rambling I have for today. Much love to all the neurodivergent and sensory divergent people that are out there. It's hard. Stay grounded. Continue to explore. Continue to work on all the things that might predictably help your nervous system. Because even though it's unpredictable, like continuing a practice can help create new pathways. And the cool thing is you can work on those things and continue to foster whatever gift you have. It doesn't, it actually, like, if you can work on things that settle your nervous system, and that doesn't mean try to predict your nervous system. Like, that means putting a practice into your life, like exercise or meditation, things that may be hard for your sensory system to in the beginning, or your nervous system in the beginning. But if you can have a practice that not always helps, but starts to create a muscle memory that will, then you can actually harness a lot more and expand those windows. By no means is it a cure, because I'm still struggling. I've got a daily meditation practice and I work out all the time. But I think I'd be much more of a hot mess if I didn't do that. All right. Have a good day, y'all.